Okay. Hello, my Religion 250 students. This is Brother Smith. I apologize for having to do an online lecture today. I was looking at my calendar and I have to be actually at the hospital running some tests during some of the sections of Religion 250 for Monday and Tuesday. So I figured we could do an online lecture and let you have class wherever you want. Go sit out on the grass or stay in bed or wash the dishes or do whatever you'd like. And then we will be back together on Wednesday and Thursday. Okay, so pretend we sang and prayed, and we will get started. Let me bring this up here. Oops, I need to share. How do I do this? Share screen. It's been a while. Okay, hopefully you can see that you are sharing screen. Okay, good. All right. All right, it's working. Okay. So hopefully there's a tiny little me in a box and a big slide right in front of you. I've shown you a couple of these already. Announcements wise, we have a career day for the church history department. You can pause the video if you want to learn more. There's a comedy show on September 17th. You can pause the video if you want to learn more. Those of you who are writers, could be great for you to get involved in the student symposium, the religious for the religion department. You could do really well there. A new one, blind date ball. Provo City Library Ballroom at Academy Square. It's going to be on 9/27. So how I think this works, I have a wonderful student, Abby, who runs this. How I think this, you sign up if you're a girl and you sign up, you have to bring a boy, but you won't be on the date with that boy. The numbers need to be even. So let's say there's 100 boys and 100 girls there. Then they all get set up on blind dates. It's a 45-minute thing. And then you come back and play as a group and do group activities and things. So if you want to go for it, I've heard it's a lot of fun. And someone sent me this, a new a cappella group, Silver Lining. People dedicated to singing. They want to have fun Tuesday or Wednesday. Here's some, you can email Eden or give her a call. Okay, let's talk about what we did last time we were together so we can get you ready for exam 1. I want you so far to be able to tell me the story of Israel from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the fathers, to all the way to the destruction of the northern kingdom, and how Judah, if you remember, we talked last time, I think we did, about Judah being saved by Isaiah and Hezekiah. So you need to be able to tell me that story. I'll probably ask you, under what prophet did the people decide they wanted a king? And you'll say Samuel. I might ask you, who are the first 3 kings of Israel, united Israel? And you'll say Saul, David, and Solomon. I might ask you about how long before Jesus was born did Israel divide? And you'll say, oh, about 975 years. I won't ask for like 975, 976, 977. It'll be mostly like 1,500 years, 1,000 years, 500 years, 10 years, something like that. Okay. I'll ask you probably how long before Jesus did Isaiah come onto the scene? And what was his message to the northern kingdom, right? You're done. And why did the southern kingdom survive when the northern kingdom didn't, at least for a little while? And that's because of Hezekiah and Isaiah. So you can see why Nephi loves Isaiah so much, right? And Hezekiah. And then I'll probably ask you about, when was the northern kingdom of Israel destroyed by Assyria? That's a big date, 721 BC. That's a big date in the history of Israel, because we lose the 10 tribes. But Judah, like we said, is saved by Isaiah and Hezekiah. So I've given you, 4 or 5 questions there. For Isaiah 53 and 54, I'll probably just ask you basically about what the prophecies we said they were about. Isaiah 53 is the the atonement of Jesus Christ, and how he is a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. And then Isaiah 54, I might even ask you, what is the only chapter quoted, the only chapter of Isaiah quoted in full to the Nephites by Jesus? And you'll say Isaiah 54. And what's it about? It's about the gathering of Israel. It's about this woman, Israel, who has been rejected and been, she's on the streets and miserable, and she gets called back by her husband, Christ. The adulterous wife is Israel, and Christ is her husband, and says, yes, for a small moment I have forsaken thee, that's the scattering, but with everlasting kindness will I gather thee. The mountains shall depart, the hills will be removed. I will love thee. Before that happens, or after that happens, you'll be far from oppression. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper. And President Nelson, we finished with last time, Russell M. Nelson, the Lord is hastening his work. I might ask you, the Lord is hastening his work to what? The Lord is hastening his work to, and you would fill in, to gather Israel. Or I might ask you, what did President Nelson say is the most important thing taking place on the earth today? And you might say the gathering. Okay. So you have this now. You can go back through, rewind, go back through, rewind. You can just go back, write down some of the questions, and make sure you can answer them, and you'll be all set. Okay. I wanted to show you something, speaking of Isaiah, that I didn't show you last time, that I love. It's from the Bible dictionary. But I hope I hope our little taste of Isaiah made you excited to maybe learn more one day, maybe take an Isaiah class at BYU. It says, as one understands Isaiah better, this is the Bible dictionary under Isaiah, he more fully comprehends the mission of the Savior and the meaning of the covenant that was placed upon Abraham and his seed, by which all the families of the earth would be blessed. That's what we studied in Isaiah 53, the mission of the Savior and the meaning of the covenant. That was Isaiah 54. So, and it's all throughout Isaiah, but we just looked at 2 chapters. So hopefully that got you a little excited to talk about that. Okay, we're going to go through some history for a while. So I don't know, sit up, pay attention, kind of just stare at the screen and stay with me as we talk through. Oh, I wanted to show you one more thing that I forgot. Sometimes we focus this verse, 1 Nephi 19, we focus on we're supposed to liken all scriptures unto us. But right above that is an interesting section where Nephi says, we were reading the books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, Deuteronomy, but I wanted them to believe in the Lord their Redeemer. So I read them Isaiah. Isn't that interesting? So according to Nephi, if you want someone to believe in the Lord, if you're like, man, I have one chance for someone to believe in the Lord, we better study Isaiah. So I don't know if that's me yet. I don't know if sometimes I'm like, someone I know is not sleeping well, so I better read to them that which was written by the prophet Isaiah, right? We need to get here. We need to get to this point where that's what Isaiah means to us. Okay. Now we're going to do some history. So just follow along. We're going to walk through the history from the destruction of the Northern Kingdom all the way down through the destruction of, not the destruction of, all the way down through the birth of Jesus. Okay. I would call this time period right here. We did this. It's all David and Solomon. We have Israel dividing. Okay, I put in a little blue area right here because I would call this the scattering of Israel. If I had to put a date on this, if someone said, hey, when was the scattering? I'd say mainly 750 BC to 550 BC, 721 to 587 to be exact. But you have Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel falling, Judah saved, but Assyria falls to Babylon, and 120 years after the fall of the northern kingdom, you have prophets like Lehi, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all saying, Jerusalem's got to repent. And you can see why people would think, Jerusalem's not going to be destroyed. 120 years ago, we didn't fall to Assyria, the greatest kingdom in the world. Why would we fall to Babylon? Lehi flees Jerusalem around 600 BC. That's the capital of the southern kingdom. And in 587 BC, the southern kingdom of Judah is taken captive by Babylon. And that's where you get the stories of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I think I mentioned this maybe, but Daniel is his Hebrew name. When he's taken to Babylon, he gets a Babylonian name, which is Belteshazzar. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those are their Babylonian names. Their original names, their Hebrew names, are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Just doesn't sound as good, right, as Rakshak and Benny. But that kind of helps you fit, oh, that's where that story goes. These little boys are taken captive. Nephi easily could have been in this group, right? Daniel's family could have fled to the New World, and Nephi is the one taken captive to Babylon. They're about the same age. You can see this on our chronology here. Don't worry about the right side. We already looked at that in class. You can see 740 BC, Isaiah begins to prophesy. 726, Hezekiah, awesome king of Judah. 721, end of the northern kingdom. And then the southern kingdom is going to keep going. They're going to have an evil king named Manasseh. You can see I've highlighted him. I've also highlighted there's Jeremiah beginning to prophesy, saying this is not looking good. And then it happens. The last king of Judah, look at the top left-hand side. The last king of Judah is Zedekiah. You can see Daniel there being carried away. You can see Ezekiel prophesying, right? And then you can have the capture of Jerusalem. It's sad day that Jerusalem falls, and they're not going to have the people of Israel are not going to have their own land back, as you would say, the Israelites. It's going to be another 2,600 years before the state of Israel is created after World War II. Okay, so what's going to happen next? Usually, as Latter-day Saints, I find it interesting that we go around 600 BC. We know that Israel is destroyed, and we know that Lehi and his family left, and so we just kind of follow our Book of Mormon study, and we follow the family, and we cross the water, and then we set up the Nephites and the Lamanites, and we read the whole story, and then we come back in our New Testament studies to Jesus, and we're like, oh, Rome's in charge. That's weird. 600 years ago when we left, Babylon was in charge. I guess it just kind of happens, and then we don't even think about it. But a lot happens in Israel in those 600 years. So we're going to let Lehi and his family go. Wave goodbye, bye. And you can guys see Laman and Lemuel shoving each other, right? And goodbye they go. And we're going to stay here, and we're going to see what happens. Babylon falls quickly. Assyria was around for like 300 years, but Babylon conquers Assyria. But there are... the captivity, it says, look at the bottom right-hand side here in the Bible dictionary section. The captivity of Babylon was brought to a close by the decree of Cyrus in 536 BC, who permitted, this is the Persian king, Cyrus, who permitted all worshipers of Jehovah to return and rebuild the temple. You can see that over here, 537 BC, the decree of Cyrus for the return of the Jews. And that's where you get prophets like Ezra and Nehemiah saying we need to rebuild the temple, we need to rebuild the city. You can see their names down there a little bit further down. I didn't highlight those. Cyrus, the Jews seem to see Cyrus as more of a liberator from Babylon than a conqueror. Babylon was brutal and terrible. This is kind of awful, but if they were going to take you home as a slave, they would shave your head and brand you, and they would put an iron hook under your tongue right here, and comes out the bottom of your chin, and you got this big like steel ring right here in your mouth, and then they chain you all together with like your steel ring, and they take you home to Babylon. It's a brutal kingdom. And so when Cyrus comes along, Here he is. He's the lead of the Persian Empire, and he starts to surround. Can you see the green? He starts to surround Babylon. Babylon is in the Fertile Crescent there. He starts to surround them, and eventually, I mean, the guy is amazing. King Cyrus. We could do a couple hours on King Cyrus. He takes Persia in his lifetime from that dark purple area to that whole entire light purple area. I mean, the guy is just an unbelievable ruler. He's not by any means, not he believes in war and conquering, but he does allow the Jews to return to Jerusalem and other religions as well, saying you've been treated poorly, go home, rebuild your city, rebuild your temple, rebuild your lives. And so the Jews look really favorably upon, we call them Jews because they're from the original kingdom of Judah, the one that was left, right? Because the Assyria took the northern 10 tribes. So the southern kingdom of Judah, we're now going to refer to those people as Jews, no matter what tribe they come from. By the way, you can speed this video up if I'm talking too slow. Go ahead and 1.25, 1.5. Yeah, go for it. Okay. He's going to say, go home, rebuild your city. He's like a guy who, I don't know, he got in a time machine, came to the United States, got a copy of How to Win Friends and Influence People, and went back because he's not brutal to these people. He lets them live their religion. They've got to pay their taxes. They're vassal states, right? They pay Persia, but he doesn't overtax them, and he wants them to live their own lives. And that's why Persia lasts so long. One thing we need to talk about, though, really quick, is when they return. Okay, focus with me here. When the Jews return from Babylon and all the places that Babylon took them, when they return, there's some Jews that never left, right? Because Babylon doesn't take everyone. Assyria doesn't take everyone. So there's some people that never left. And what you had was, because it was part of Assyria, Israel, the northern and southern kingdom was part of Assyria, and then it was part of Babylon, and now it's part of Persia. You have Jews, all house of Israel, intermarrying with some of these Gentiles. So let's say I'm a Jewish father. I didn't get taken away by Assyria. I didn't get taken away by Babylon. I couldn't live that long, but you get what I mean. And my little daughter, Maddie, falls in love with Truman, the Babylonian soldier, right? And she's like, I love him. You don't know him like I do. And I'm like, no, you can't love a Babylonian, right? And they get married and they have children. And I like these cute little kids. And now I've got these half Jewish, half Gentile little grandbabies. And then they have children, and then they have children. So what are we going to do, right? Are they Jewish or are they not Jewish? So when they go to return to rebuild, when Cyrus says you can return and rebuild your city, there are Jews in Jerusalem who refuse to allow these ancestors of these, like Harry Potter would call them half-bloods, right? They refuse to allow them into the city to rebuild. They're not Jews, basically. They say, you're not Jew. You're not a Jew. And that's where you get this people called the Samaritans. These people who are rejected from rebuilding the temple go to the north of Jerusalem. You can see there's Jerusalem, Bethlehem. They go to the north of Jerusalem and they build their own city. They, in fact, build their own religion up there. It's very similar. It's almost an exact copy of, Jehovah, Judaism, but it's their own because they were rejected from rebuilding. It's really quite sad. And the Samaritans, who are these ancestors, and the Jews, who are the ones who kicked them out originally, this rivalry is going to continue to grow, and it's going to affect Jesus's life in the stories that we read, the Samaritans versus the Jews. And it all happened because, I might ask you, where did this all start? Where did the Samaritan Jewish revolt start? And you could even see it starting in the northern and southern kingdom, right? Because they sit just in the same places. But eventually it becomes, no, you're not fully Jewish, so you're out. And Jerusalem is a place for those who are not half-bloods or mudbloods, right? Harry Potter language. Okay, so if we follow our timeline, oh, sorry, I didn't know this was going to do this every time. We've got our scattering of Israel, okay? And then Babylon is conquered by Persia. Cyrus, I'll probably ask you on the exam, who allows the Jews to return and rebuild. And when was kind of that first separation with the Samaritans? What was it over? And it was over the rebuilding of the temple. We could talk for a long time about the Persian Empire. We're not going to. That's probably an ancient civ class, but just say that the Persian Empire lasts a really long time. That's where you get Queen Esther. She marries a Persian king, if you know where that story fits in. And they go all the way for quite some time until they are finally conquered by this guy, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is another type Cyrus person who just knows how to conquer lands. And look how big he creates the Macedonian Empire. It's just the known world. He takes it from east to west, south into Egypt. I mean, he takes everything is Alexander's, and including Israel. Can you see Israel there? See if you can find it on the map before we move on. Right over there on the Great Sea, the Western Sea, you've got Jerusalem, and it becomes part of the empire of Alexander the Great. And with Alexander the Great comes a culture shift, a major culture shift. We're going to call it Hellenization. Okay, it's the spread of Greek culture, because that's where Alexander's from. He's Alexander from Macedonia, but he's from Greece. And the Greeks had really pushed language and architecture and art and philosophy in new ways. It's kind of like having Apple take over your country. They just had moved so far ahead of everybody else. So Hellenization is the historical spread, read this with me, of ancient Greek culture. To a lesser extent, the language over foreign peoples, including the Israelites, the Jews, and the Samaritans, conquered by Greece or brought into a sphere of influence, particularly during the Hellenistic period following the campaigns of Alexander the Great of Macedon. The result of Hellenization was that elements of Greek origins combined in various forms and degrees with the locals. And it seems that the Jews, the Jewish people, and including the Samaritans as well, many of them embrace this new Greek culture that comes with this conquering of Alexander. He sees himself as someone who is bringing the future to the world, right? There's much better ways of thinking. With that, you end up with three main Jewish kind of sects. All right. And they're spread across the spectrum. So on one side, you have the Sadducees. I call them in the world and of the world. They love Hellenization. They love everything about the Greek way of life. They do accept the 5 books of Moses as scripture, but that's about it. And they don't believe in an afterlife because that's not part of Hellenization. So the Sadducees on one end embrace Hellenization. On the other far end of the spectrum are the people called the Essenes, and they are not in the world and they are not of the world. They separate themselves entirely. They move out of Jerusalem, out by the Dead Sea where nobody wants to live. They reject Hellenization. They won't have any part of it, zero part of it. They accepted the oral law. They developed their own oral law. Oral law is we have the law of Moses, and we've added on to it by Jewish leaders have added on to it. Okay, now who would mostly be in the middle? You got your two extremes: Sadducees, who are like Hellenization, yes, and the Essenes are like Hellenization, no, absolutely none. You got this middle group who kind of fall under the area of where Pharisees. They're in the world, but not of the world. You can have some Hellenization in your life, but not all. You need to accept written scripture. It's okay to develop written law. And they're kind of mainstream Jews that try to pick out the good in Hellenization. So if you are a Jew living during this time period, if you're Jewish parents, let's say, how much Hellenization do you allow into your family, into your life? Do you allow your children to go to Greek theater? Do you allow them to see Greek art? Do you allow them to go to the Greek gymnasium, right? Where everybody's in the nude, right? That creates a whole set of problems because Jewish boys are circumcised, and so they certainly see that they are different than Greeks, and that creates problems. So how much do you allow this to happen? You can kind of see this pull. I bet it's very similar today when we would say, how much of the world do you allow into your family, right? Did you grow up in a family of like Sadducees? Like, hey, we love all movies, we love all theater, we love all. Who cares, right? Who cares what it's rated? Who cares, right? We'll take it all. Or did you grow up in a family of like Essenes where it's like, no, there's no TV, there's no DVDs, we only watch BYU TV, if we even watch BYU TV, there's absolutely zero worldliness, right, in our house. Or I would guess that most of you grew up in homes that would be like, would fall into this middle group, that no, we don't accept everything, but we try to pick out the good in the Hellenization, and we try to remain who we are, the religious people that we are. So you can kind of see this pull between these three. I hope that's helpful because it's going to end up impacting Jesus's life quite a bit. The Sadducees are going to hate him, but for totally different reasons than the Pharisees hate him. And John the Baptist is going to grow up as an Essene. He's going to grow up in the wilderness far away. All right, so let's see how far we got. I can't believe I have to do this again. Okay, here we go. Abraham, Isaac, who are the first three kings of Israel? Saul, David, and Solomon. What happened after Solomon? They divided into the northern and southern tribes. We have a divided kingdom, period of divided kingdom. Isaiah begins to prophesy, and when is the northern kingdom destroyed? 721. I know we've already been through this, sorry, but I didn't fix the PowerPoint to not go line by line. Assyria falls to Babylon, and then who else falls to Babylon? Yeah, the southern kingdom of Judah. And what do we call that time period? The scattering of Israel. Who conquers Babylon and allows the Jews to return and rebuild their city? Do you know that? Because I'm going to ask you that on the exam. Cyrus, king of Persia. And that's when the separation with the Samaritans happens. Persia is conquered by Alexander the Great. Look at the distance there between those two dates, 537 to 332. That's a long. Persia was around for a long time. Okay, what is going to happen next? Alexander is going to die, and he dies young, and no one expected him to die. Alexander the Great, come on, he's awesome. He's like 30 something, and he dies. And apparently on his deathbed, someone asked him, like, who gets your kingdom, right? Who is your heir? And he said something, the story goes that he says something like the strongest. And that starts a war between all of his major generals and advisors. That is, let's see, right here. Okay, so this is Alexander's kingdom being broken up after his death. You can see the different, I won't have you know all of these. The only two I want you to know are the two that have to do with our land of Israel. Can you find our land of Israel there? Gaza is listed right there. Damascus, Jerusalem isn't listed. It should be, but it's right there between Gaza and Damascus. You would have Jerusalem, and you can see the Seleucid kingdom is this big yellow kingdom here, and the Ptolemaic kingdom is down here in Egypt, and their border is where? Yeah, right on Israel. So Israel is sitting in a hornet's nest. These two kingdoms are warring over this land, and it would be miserable to be right there in the middle, right? And you're just a Jewish family living there, and I don't know if you necessarily care. They're both Greek kingdoms, so it's just back and forth. That's why it's kind of drawn that way, purple with the piece of Seleucid in the middle, because their borders are constantly changing. Let's see, I think I have this listed right here on the look for the red here on the left hand side. Philip of Macedon is slain. That's Alexander's dad. Persian power ends in 330, and here comes Alexander the Great, and the dismemberment of his empire. It's so quick. Okay, now eventually, do you see this yellow team right here on the top right hand side? They are eventually going to push the purple team, the Ptolemaic Empire, all the way down into Egypt, okay, past Alexandria. They're going to push them all the way down. So Jerusalem and Israel becomes part of the Seleucid Empire. That's going to happen around 160, 170 BC. We're getting closer to the time of Christ, that the Seleucid Empire is now in control. And it goes well enough until this guy, look at the top right-hand side. Antiochus Epiphanes comes to power over the Seleucid Empire, which Israel is a part of now because they pushed the Ptolemaics into Egypt. Antiochus Epiphanes. And this guy is the exact opposite of anybody who is good. He thinks the biggest problem with the Jews is that there are Jews, and that there is a thing called Judaism, and he thinks he needs to get rid of it. So he outlaws Judaism. He goes into their temple that they've rebuilt. He goes into the Holy of Holies, which, you know, we talked about one person going in one time a year. He puts up statues of Zeus, the Greek god, which look a lot like him. In the Holy of Holies, it's a terrible time, and circumcision is outlawed. You can't circumcise your baby boys. If you do, the story goes that if you do circumcise your baby boy and they find out about it, they kill the baby and make you wear the baby as a necklace around your neck to show other people that can't happen. He is a tyrant, just as bad as they come. And what's going to happen? Do you see how he comes into power in 175? Do you see this plays out? Right here, do you see the next red part I've highlighted? 167 BC. The Jews necessarily don't revolt. They're a passive people as long as you leave them alone. But this pushes them too far. The evil, the evil outlawing of Judaism pushes them too far, and they revolt. It starts with this guy, 167. Look right here. Mattathias the Hasmonean revolts. Apparently, in a little village outside of Jerusalem, Mattathias is commanded to sacrifice a pig, which is totally against on an altar, which is totally against Mosaic law, and he won't do it. And there's Seleucid Empire people there commanding him to do it. Other Jews are saying, just do it, and he won't do it. He stands up for himself and for his beliefs, and he ends up killing some Seleucid Empire representatives. He ends up killing some of these people, and it's like, I don't know if he's a soldier. I don't think he's a soldier. I think he's just like a dad. And he goes home, and people are starting to look to him like, you revolted against. Now, luckily, Mattathias has 5 sons. Do you see his 5 sons here? These are the 5 sons of Mattathias, and they are going to run what's called the Maccabean revolt. You've heard of the Maccabees before. This is where it starts. This is where the Maccabees, they're going to fight back, and the battles begin. And do you see in 166 BC, so you have Mattathias the Hasmonean. His son is a guy named Judas. Do you see right there? The Battle of Emmaus and the victory of Judas Maccabeus. Judas is one of these sons. Now, why is he called Judah Maccabeus? Maccabeus is a nickname. His name is Judas the Hammer. And that's why it's sometimes, let me go back. It's sometimes called, look at 167 right there, Jewish history column, not total right-hand side, but not total left-hand side, right in the middle. 167, Mattathias the Hasmonean, Battle of Emmaus, victory of Judas Maccabeus. Judas the Hammer, the son of Mattathias. All five sons participate in the revolt. Here you can see their little family tree right here. Mattathias, along with John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. They're all going to take part in this revolt. And go back one more slide just to show you. Look at 165 BC. So Mattathias, the Hasmonean revolts, the Battle of Emmaus, the victory of Judas Maccabeus, and 165, the dedication of the temple. They take the temple back. And little Jewish boys and girls grow up learning the stories of the Maccabees and how they fought back. In fact, if you look at American history, John Adams, George Washington, they wrote a little bit about how they saw themselves as Maccabees. They were driving this massive, see this yellow, massive empire out of their land, much like the founding fathers were driving Great Britain, right? England out of the land. And you guys, the craziest thing happens. They win. They win. They defeat the greatest army in the world. They don't conquer them, but they push them out of their land, so they have to go home. Now, who's in charge if the Maccabees win? The Maccabees, of course. So you have now this Maccabean family that runs the show. And the one who survives is Simon, and his children. You can kind of see if you look. Mattathias, there's his five sons, and his son Simon. They're going to have, these is going to become the ruling family. From Simon to John Hyrcanus down to Aristobulus the First. They are going to run Israel. I didn't tell you the story of Hanukkah right here. When they go and they take back the temple in 165 BC, do you see that? It's the bottom, the lowest highlighted thing. They go into the temple. Of course, it's been defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes. They clean it out, and they go to burn the menorah, and they find they don't have very much oil. Not more so than last maybe a day. But they put the oil in and light it, and it lasts for 8 days. It's the miracle of the dedication of the temple, and that is every year the celebration of Hanukkah. It's the festival of lights that God made the menorah in the temple burn for that much longer, and the temple was rededicated. So awesome, you guys, amazing. We have our land back. It's ours. This is going to be awesome. What should we do with it? Right? Should we return to God? Should we return to the law of Moses? Return to the commandments? No, we don't do that. You can see you've got Mattathias, the dad, then the sons, then the grandsons, then the great-grandsons, and you get down here to the great-great-grandsons, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. And, by the time you get to a great-great-grandson, they've forgotten the sacrifices of their ancestors. Much like you and I, we don't often think as often as we should about the sacrifices of our ancestors. And they start fighting about power. They're brothers, and they start fighting over who gets the power. And so both of them are going to invite a new and up and coming nation in to help them. Okay, so oh my word, we're going to do this again. Okay, sorry. Who are the first 3 kings of Israel? Saul, David, and Solomon. When did Israel divide? What year? When did Isaiah come on the scene? When would you call the scattering of Israel? 721 to 587 BC. What happens after, who destroys Babylon? Right, Persia and Cyrus, and he allows the Jews to return and rebuild. Then you have Persia conquered by Alexander the Great, and he's the one that brings in all the Hellenization. And Alexander's death is going to make the kingdom start warring with each other. The two that we want focused on are the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic. They war with Israel in the middle. Then here comes this evil tyrant, Antiochus Epiphanes, and the revolt of the Hasmonean family. Mattathias Hasman, and Judas Maccabeus, Judas the Hammer. Oh, and then I threw in those three separate movements start to form. Conservative, right? Let's embrace the law of Moses. Progressive, let's embrace Hellenism. And Essenes, we're out of here. We won't have any Hellenization at all in our lives. Okay, so these two brothers, very bottom, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus, they start fighting with each other, and they invite an up-and-coming kingdom to help them out. And the kingdom is Rome. So you can see bottom left-hand side, the disputes between Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. They both write to Jerusalem, or not, sorry, they both write to Rome saying, can you help us? And Rome says, we can absolutely help you. We would love to help you. You've got a prime piece of property. In fact, why don't we take over? And Jerusalem is taken the next year by Pompey. It's so sad. Their great grandfathers fought for the Seleucid Empire, for freedom, and they gave it up. They let the Romans come in and take over. Every time I teach it, I get sad. It's just so sad. Okay. So what's Rome going to do with these people? Rome is going to say to the Maccabees, to the Maccabean family, remember our Maccabean family? They're going to say, yeah, you guys are great, but we really don't need you. So we're going to place our own king in the land. His name is Herod. And just to make it look good, we're going to have him marry one of the Maccabees. So look at the very bottom left-hand side. Here's Herod the Great. He's not a Maccabee, but he's married to Mariamne, who is a granddaughter of Aristobulus. And so they're gonna marry, and it's supposed to look like a merger between the Roman Empire and the Maccabean Empire. It's really not a merger. Herod kills Mariamne and her two sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, which he said he loved her and the two sons, but he cares too much about power. And Herod the Great is going to rule for quite some time. Let's see, I've got that one right here. Where is Herod placed? I thought I had Herod placed. Herod set up as king. If you look at the bottom left-hand side, I'm sorry, I don't have it highlighted. Bottom left-hand side, you have Herod fleeing to Rome, and then Herod comes back and takes Jerusalem there in 37 BC. So he's going to be around for the time of Jesus. So this is going to be decades that the Jews in Judea live under the rule of this guy, Herod the Great. How did they feel about being ruled by the Romans? The Romans were somewhat like the Persians, that it was a policy of all Rome to treat national religions with respect. They didn't go into the temple, for example. Romans weren't allowed into the temple. But they did kind of, they had a heavy hand. The Jews had express permission to put to death even a Roman citizen if he was found inside the middle of the wall of the partition. So, okay, so they respect their temple. The Jewish parts of Palestine were practically governed by the high priest and the Sanhedrin. The high priest is the original high priest that we talked about in the temple, but now it's more of a political appointment and not necessarily a spiritual appointment. The Sanhedrin is made up of Pharisees and Sadducees, not Essenes because they left, but Pharisees and Sadducees. And except that capital sentences needed the procurator's confirmation, so they couldn't execute someone without asking their Roman, big brother who is there. At the time of Christ, it's going to be a guy named Pilate, Pontius Pilate, who is kind of watching over the Jews. But the Jews pretty much run themselves. The Jewish parts of Palestine were run by other Jews, Pharisees and Sadducees. And then look at the bottom. Yet the Jews always hated Roman rule and were constantly in rebellion. Well, why? Well, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the Maccabees freed us, right? And we gave up our freedom to these to these Romans. So you can see why it wasn't that long ago that they had a taste of freedom. Okay, I'm not going to do this again. Oh, sorry. Okay, the rise of Antiochus Epiphanes, the revolt of the family, and the three separate movements form. I'm going to ask you about those. The Hasmonean prince Hyrcanus asks Rome for help to defeat Aristobulus. Those are the two brothers. And Pompey takes Jerusalem, and Rome places Herod the king, Herod the Great as the king. All right, what do we do now? We're back as a vassal state to somebody else. I mean, how many countries have ruled Jerusalem so far? We started with Assyria, then we went to Babylon, then we went to Persia, then we went to the Greeks, the Seleucid, which are Greeks, and we had our brief little freedom with the Hasmoneans, and now we are under Roman rule. It has been so long. It's been hundreds and hundreds of years since we had our own place. Can you see why in a Messiah, they would be looking for someone to free them from all this oppression, from all these different kingdoms who conquer them? So what is the Lord going to do? The Lord's got a problem. People are calling for help. And so what does he usually do? We've been talking about this in class, right? There's a tower, and the Lord needed to fix it, so he fixed it with Abraham and Sarah, this little no-name couple. Israel was going to choose a king, so he got him a good prophet, this little boy named Samuel. It seems that the Lord always just finds some no-name person out in the middle of nowhere and says, you're going to save the world. And that's what he does. He calls on a little girl. She lives in a little tiny village in up in where the northern kingdom used to be, up by the Sea of Galilee. She lives in a little village called Nazareth, and she is going to have a baby. President Monson said, with the birth of the babe in Bethlehem, there emerged a great endowment, a power stronger than weapons, a wealth more lasting than the coins of Caesar. With this little girl and her baby is going to come power stronger than any nation has ever seen. Okay, now as you've read the Gospel of Mark, I've got a couple more minutes here, and hopefully you've been watching this on 1.25 speed, so it's not taking too long. As you've read the Gospel of Mark, you've seen Jesus. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is moving fast. The Gospel of Mark was probably written by Mark under the direction of Peter. Do you see that on the third point down? So Peter is likely the author of Mark, but Mark's the one actually putting pen to paper. So we could call the Gospel of Mark the Gospel of Peter. It's meant to be fast. It's meant to be used as a script for an oral performance. It's transmitted orally for decades. So a missionary could memorize the Gospel of Mark and go out and, that's his discussions as he goes out and gives this gospel. That's why it's shorter and quicker. It appeals to a Gentile audience. Well, that makes sense, because who are they preaching the gospel to by the time these gospels are written? They're finally preaching the gospel to Gentiles. He's giving lots of explanations to non-Jewish writers. That's how we know he's writing to Gentiles, because of all these explanations. The Jewish people, if he was writing to Jewish people, he wouldn't need to give the explanations. This is our most fast-moving picture of the Lord. He is going and moving. In fact, he's always immediately doing things. Did you notice in your reading of the Gospel of Mark? Jesus left, and Jesus knew the Spirit was there, and immediately the bleeding stopped. Jesus made his disciples get in the boat. It's like Jesus is on rollerblades right through the whole Gospel of Mark. The word immediately is this sense of we got to move in this gospel. You might have noticed in your reading of Mark that Jesus goes to the temple a lot, and that's because of the 3 solemn feasts. I think we've mentioned these in class before, but let's line them out. In the spring, Jesus likely went to the temple, to Jerusalem, for the feast of Passover. And that was, it's called Pesach, say it out loud, Pesach. And it's instituted to commemorate the passing over of the children of Israel in Egypt, way back with Moses. In the summer, it was for the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot. Say that out loud, Shavuot. It commemorates the anniversary of the giving of the Ten Commandments. And in the fall is the big happy one that's right around Yom Kippur, is the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot. Say that out loud, Sukkot. Sukkot was the big one. You had your 10 days of repentance. Then you had a new year, and then Yom Kippur, and the most important day in all of Israel, Yom Kippur. And then 5 days, look at the last paragraph, 5 days after Yom Kippur is the Feast of Tabernacles. It means tabernacles like tents, like actual like camping tents. They would live in their tents and celebrate the wandering of the Israelites in the desert for 40 years and how they had to rely upon God for that time. And it also celebrates the harvest festival. So as Jesus is going back and forth from where he lives, which is in far north Israel, the former northern kingdom, that's where Nazareth is, Capernaum. He's going to make a lot of trips down to the southern part of Israel to go to Jerusalem, to go to the temple. And it's very likely it's for whenever he goes, he's going for one of these 3 solemn feasts. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time reviewing the Gospel of Mark, and here's why. Because there's a theory which most New Testament scholars think is right on, and that is Markan priority, or that Mark was written first, and that Matthew and Luke both had copies of Mark when they wrote their Gospels, and they added to it. And that would make sense, because if it was written by Peter, just put to pen by Mark, then they would defer to Peter for these main stories and then add what they know, or who they've interviewed, or who they've talked to, or sermons that Jesus gave that maybe can't be in the Gospel of Mark because it needs to be short, because it's going to be given orally, right? It's going to be transmitted. It's going to be a missionary pamphlet, whereas these can be longer books that are meant to be read and studied. However, that doesn't mean that Mark isn't valuable, even though you're going to get mostly all of Mark in Matthew, and you're mostly going to get all of Mark in Luke. There are a couple of stories that are only in Mark, and I thought we'd finish by looking at these, if that's okay. Mark chapter 4, 26 through 29. This is the only parable that is found in Mark. So let's go. Mark chapter 4. Open up your scriptures if you have them. You maybe have never even heard of this parable. Mark 4, 26 through 29. Jesus says, this is like the kingdom of God. A man could put seed in the ground and then goes to bed, and then rises up, and the seed springs up and grows. And he doesn't know how. So if you ask the farmer, if you're like, hey, how does that do that? He'd go, I have no idea. The earth does most of the work. It brings forth the fruit of herself, first the blade, then the ear, then the full corn. And when the fruit is there, he puts forth his sickle because he wants to eat. He's hungry. And that's the end of the parable. Now, most parables Jesus doesn't explain. He only explains 2 of his 55 parables, and this isn't one of them. So it's up to you and I think, to say, well, what does he mean by that? If we were in class together, I'm guessing, just from my experience with BYU students, some of you would say that's missionary work. We go out and we plant seeds, and we hope that they'll grow, but it's really up to the Lord if they're going to grow. And when the person is ready for baptism, we are right there, for the harvest has come. We're excited. Another student said to me that this is the atonement. I use the atonement. I love the atonement. How it works, I don't know. I can't tell you how the atonement works and changes people's lives. It seems to do it. It seems to just do it all by itself. But I want to use it. I'm going to keep using it. So I think, and maybe you come up with your own answer in your journal, what you think the parable of the seed growing secretly. It's not a great name because it's not growing secretly. It's more growing mysteriously, I guess. The farmer that doesn't know how the seed grows, why the seed grows, but he's not going to stop. That's one thing. if the gospel works, if the gospel is working for you, but you don't know everything about it, well, don't stop, right? If the dumbest thing the farmer could do would be like, well, I do not understand how this works. So until I understand how this works, I am not growing any more corn. Just keep growing corn and eventually you'll figure out how it works, right? Eventually you'll get, every time you do it, you'll get more and more knowledge. So don't leave, right? Don't walk away because you want to eat. That's the end goal. All right, let's look at Mark 7. Here's another story that's found only in Mark. Mark 7, 31 through 37. Mark 1, 31 through 37. They bring this man to him who was deaf and had an impediment of speech, and they beseech him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitude. So he takes him away, and he put his fingers into his ears and spit and touched his tongue. So this is very, Jesus, on this miracle, he's very hands-on. Some miracles, he doesn't touch anyone. In fact, he doesn't have to be there. And for some miracles, he just says it's done, it's done. But on this one, he's very hands-on. And he looked to heaven, and he said, be opened. And straightway his ears were opened, and the string of his tongue was loosed, and he spake plain. And he charged them they should tell no man. But they tell everybody anyway. So why is Jesus, I guess I might ask you, why is Jesus so hands-on with this one? Is it because the man can't hear him? And so he's got to give him something to have faith in, right? Because oftentimes when Jesus heals people, he talks to them, but this man he can't talk to, the man's deaf. So is that why? He puts his fingers in his ears so the man knows he wants to heal me, and his impediment of speech, so he touches his tongue. He wants to heal me of my two problems. I don't know. But Mark's the only one that didn't make the cut for Matthew and Luke, apparently. All right, and let's look at the last one. Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, 22 through 26. He comes to Bethesda. They bring a blind man unto him and besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. So again, he leads him away from people, which is always just fascinating. He doesn't always do that, but he does in this one. And he spit on his eyes, and he put his hands on him, and he says, what do you see? And he says, I see men as trees walking, which tells me the man has seen before because he knows what a tree looks like. And after that, he put his hands again on his eyes and made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly. And he sent him away, saying, neither go into any town nor tell it to any man. So this one is the only miracle that I know of that happens in stages, that Jesus does part of the miracle, talks to the guy, and then does the second part of the miracle. And obviously Jesus could heal him the first time. I don't think Jesus was like, what do you see? And he's like, trees walking. He's like, whoa, that's not what I was going for. But maybe I'm going to test your faith. I'm going to see how you react. I'm going to bless you a little. I'm going to give you a little bit and see how you react. Maybe the guy could have been like, that's not what I wanted. You didn't help me at all. Right? See if you'll stick around when you get a partial blessing, maybe. I'm not quite sure. I bet you'll have your own ideas on that. All right. I think that's all I have for you today. All right. So we will meet again on Wednesday and Thursday. Again, I apologize for not being able to be in class. Hopefully, I'm going to get this health issue figured out sooner than later. And we won't have to do this too much. But if we do, please be patient with me as I work through this. All right, my friends, love you. Stay good. I can stop sharing. Stay good and be happy, and do some service. Be a happy BYU student. Help those who are lonely around you. And we'll see you later. Okay, bye.